Right, we come to item number 13, which is the update of the on the Māori representation in local government, and councillors will recall that this was brought to our attention at the joint meeting of the governing body and the Independent Māori Statutory Board. That grouping established a working party to look at Māori representation and came back with a recommendation for us to consider a model that was set up by the Royal Commission, or in part the model set up by the Royal Commission in terms of Māori representation, compared to the current model that we have endorsed and made submissions on, which was the parliamentary model. So I'm not anticipating that we'll make a substantive decision on this issue, because I think it's a serious issue that needs further consultation with mana whenua, mata waka, and we would want our officials to come back with, having done that consultation, with an explanation of the key options for Māori representation and the pros and cons of each option. If I just make a final initial comment, it was considered that perhaps something could be done in time for the election 10 months out from now, in 2022. But the working party that made this recommendation did correspond with Minister Mahuta, and it was clear that the model that was being proposed would not be legislated for prior to 2022, if it were legislated for at all. So it takes some of the urgency out of this, and therefore there may be good sense in giving this thorough consideration rather than rushed consideration. But before I'll invite Rose Leonard and Warwick McNaughton to talk to the paper, could I perhaps ask Councillor Alf Filipina to move the recommendations and Councillor Dalton to second it as two of the three members on the joint working party. Councillor Filipina, Councillor Dalton, are you happy to move and second the recommendations?
Yeah, I put it in the sidebar, Your Worship. So yeah,
okay,
I'll
sorry.
move
Yes,
and kill that.
Yep,
Bye-bye.
sorry, hadn't read that yet, and Councillor Dalton seconded it. So if I could invite Rose Leonard to commence the report by officials on the recommendations, please.
Good on me, Phil, and councillors. It's good to be with you today. This report, as the Mayor said, is the follow-up in response to the joint GB-IMSB hui on the 16th of December, where you agreed to consider the Royal Commission model in time for 2022, and if not, for 2025. In the report, we've given you an overview of the model proposed by the Royal Commission in the lead up to Auckland's amalgamation in 2010. This is the model that's been supported by the joint group made up of 3 members of the Independent Māori Statutory Board and 3 members of your governing body. This group was supported by staff from the IMSB Secretariat and Council, and I just wanted to say kia ora to my colleagues and the joint group for this mahi. The joint group looked at 5 models of governance, which included the existing model known as the parliamentary model. All but that existing model would require legislative change for a bespoke model for Tāmaki Makaurau, or alternatively legislative change for all of Aotearoa. Excuse me. The joint group asked staff to carefully consider ways to change the Royal Commission model should the governing body be willing to change its existing position. Your existing position, just to remind you, is that you wish to have Māori ward councillors via the existing parliamentary model in time for the 2025 elections. And you have supported Minister Mahuta's Omnibus Bill, which removes the existing cap to the number of Auckland ward councillors so that Auckland Council can achieve this. The Minister's discussion document did not ask about different models for Māori representation in local government, and she has indicated that the focus of her staff is on getting the Omnibus Bill enacted by November next year, and that's after the 2022 elections. For those reasons, Auckland Council staff have not recommended that you pursue change for 2022. Staff have not yet engaged with mana whenua or mātāwaka on these matters, and it's for that reason that we now make the 3 recommendations that you have before you, which is to engage with mana whenua and mātāwaka in order to inform Auckland Council's future position on Māori representation, to consider its support for a model of Māori representation, including the Royal Commission model, once all of that engagement is completed with mana whenua and mātāwaka, and to come back to you with a timeline for further work early in 2022. Thank you, Mayor Phil. I'll just leave it open now for pātai.
Okay, thank you very much. That's pretty clear exposition of where we're at, and we did discuss this at the joint working group, but I'm open for, first of all, any questions on it. If not, any comments on it. So following the advice of officers, we'll get a report and a timeline for the work that needs to be done on this pretty early next year. I have a question from Councillor Kooning. Councillor Kooning.
Tēnā koe, te him koromatua. Ngā mihi Rose, thank you for everybody who's worked on this and brought this forward. The pātai I have just relates to the interaction between the resolution from the governing body IMSB meeting seeking us to be advocating for this model in time for the 2022 elections. And I totally appreciate all the practical reasons why that's difficult, but we already had the minister's response before that resolution. So my understanding is that IMSB was still looking for us to be advocates to progress this at pace and to be looking at it in time for 2022. So I can understand the recommendations and I'm very happy to support them, but I just want to really understand how this responds to the expectations from IMSB when we held that meeting. Kia ora, thank you.
Yeah, I think the question, Rose, is it actually possible to implement any change in terms of the election in October next year with regard to the minister's letter where she said she's not prepared to legislate for the alternative model? Is it possible in order to get a Māori ward in place on the parliamentary model by 2022? My understanding was that it wasn't.
Sorry, with respect, Mr. Mayor, that's not my pātai. I mean, that is one question, but mine is more about we all knew what the minister's response was and the practicalities. Yeah. It's more to do with our relationship with IMSB and acting in good faith to the resolution that we passed, which was their expectation that we would, notwithstanding the minister's response, be actually still advocating for the resolutions, is just to see what we can do for 2022. So I just wanted to understand that part of it.
Yeah, so I'm sorry if I misrepresented your question, but we can't advocate for something that we can't put into effect. But I'll leave that over to Rose to answer your question and my question.
Kia ora, Councillor Kooning, thank you for your question. As officers of Auckland Council, who and my team are the ones who run the elections, we looked really hard at practical ways in which we could achieve this by 2022. At the moment, you have to undertake a representation review in order to do to make a change to your boundaries. If we were to implement, I mean, practically the minister's, I'll start with practically the minister's bill to allow you to have Māori wards is not going to be through in time for this election, for the 2022 election. That's where we started. But if she was able to rush through legislation under urgency, that removed the need for us to undertake a representation review in time for the 2022 elections. And also that she was prepared to entertain a bespoke model for Auckland. What would actually need to happen in order for that to happen? It is my view, the view of my staff, that we cannot practically achieve that for 2022. And so notwithstanding what the IMSB had wanted us to achieve, we don't believe it is practically possible to achieve that, given the Minister's response. I did look at every angle, Councillor Kooning, I assure you, to see if we could achieve this. I don't believe it is possible under current legislation.
No, I thank you for that answer. I agree with that, but I guess we knew that when we passed our resolution in December as well. So accept where we've landed, and I support this. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. I have no further questions on this. Are there any comments? Oh, sorry, I have Councillor Filipaina, question.
Thank you, Your Worship. Look, my partai is in regards to the engagement that is referred to in B. Our understanding with the recommendation that we went through with the working group was that the working group recommendation came back to the governing body to make a decision, and that decision was to either continue with the recommendation that Councillor Pippa has just referred to, which was legislative change, or that we support what the working group had put through to the governing body. Now, there was no discussion around us as in the governing body going out to the engagement before we make our own decision. So I'm a wee bit confused with B, Your Worship, and Rose, that's my understanding, is that we needed to go have our corridor with governing body as the Independent Māori Statutory Board did with the joint recommendation, and they came back supporting the Royal Commission model. As Councillor Kooning said earlier in her partai, was that we made a decision that went through to the working group that we were going to do the parliamentary model. So why is it now a necessity or be there when we need to make a decision on the working group recommendation? Because I'm now confused, and I don't normally get confused, but I am now. Kia ora.
Let's see if Rose can help on that. Rose.
Thank you, Councillor Filipaina. This is our best advice to you as staff about the best way to conduct this process going forward. We've not yet had an opportunity to talk to our treaty partners and mātāwaka about this important matter. We believe it's really important, and we will be talking to those same people ahead of the Future of Local Government Review panel meeting, and they'll be talking to you in April of next year. We would like to join up our consultation with that process because we see the future of local government as being an excellent vehicle to bring about change of this nature and to get through some fairly significant legislative change that would be needed in order to implement the Royal Commission model, should mana whenua and mātāwaka agree that that is the model that they wish us to pursue. We don't have clear visibility of that at the moment. So our best advice to you from both my team and Ngā Matarai is that we go out and consult with our treaty partners and mātāwaka on this.
Your Worship, look, I'll say I won't be supporting B, just to let you know, Your Worship, and maybe that needs me to withdraw mover, and I will, through my whakaaro, explain why. Because that is not my understanding also from the Independent Māori Statutory Board in regards to what we recommended moving forward. So look, Your Worship, I can ask other questions, but from my perspective as the co-chair, and I'm hoping that the two other councillors, Councillor Dalton and Henderson, the same view. And Your Worship, I just think that with the delay that will happen with B, and if I'm bordering on now making my comments, I just wanted to put that in front of yourself, Your Worship, because that was not my understanding, even with the discussions I had with the Independent Māori Statutory Board, because at the moment we are delaying that process. If we decide to still support the parliamentary model as a result of legislation having to be put in place, I would rather do that. Then we are clear as governing body what our position would be, and not to go out with our treaty partners. That's not the understanding I got from our working group. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Just to clarify, Councillor, are you withdrawing your moving of the motion? It's a little bit hard to move the motion, but to oppose a key part of it. I'll just need to get an alternative mover of the recommendation if you want to withdraw from that.
Yeah, like so Your Worship, I am based on B, because that is not my understanding as co-chair of what the process was going to be from the governing body. And when Councillor Kooning mentioned, just our relationship with Independent Māori Statutory Board, that is my understanding. Kia ora.
Okay, just to try to clear it up, because it is quite an important matter, we agreed at the meeting that we would consider whether we'd support an alternative model of Maori representation. And what our officers are saying, I guess, in this is as part of determining whether we were going to support an alternative model, we would be probably at some risk if we made this decision without consulting with mana whenua and mata waka. That's the position of behind the officer's advice, Rose?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So look, this could have been done, I guess, in a fairly quick and peremptory way by simply saying, well, we looked at this, we've already decided we're doing the parliamentary model, so we'll have a vote on it. I got the sense, but correct me, Alf, if I'm wrong, that we should do this thoroughly rather than simply get it off the table now without giving due consideration for the alternative model. And if we give consideration for the alternative model, I know we would come under a lot of criticism from the mana whenua forum, for example, if we weren't to consult them on it. That's where the difficulty lies in it. Does that explain why we're doing it? If you've got any other question that you'd like to clarify, I'm happy to take any further questions.
I'll go through the partai, because now there's several questions. And Rose, I hate to ask you these questions, but I need to get clarification around this particular issue. Can you confirm that at the working group meeting that there was no discussion in regards to going out for consultation? Can you confirm that?
You're talking about in the joint group, the political group, or in the staff working group, Councillor?
I'm talking about our working group, and that the process that we discussed there was that each of the recommendation would go to the Independent Māori Statutory Board. They would discuss it and then have a recommendation as to whether they support the working group recommendation. It then went to the governing body as to whether they support that recommendation from the working party, which was support the Royal Commission. So I want to confirm that there was no discussion when we discussed this particular issue, and if Warwick's online, he can answer that question, that there was no discussion around going out to engagement with mana whenua, with our community around that, because of the timeline.
If I may, Mayor Phil, answer that question. The working group, the staff group, have always discussed going out to discuss this with mana whenua and mata waka. Always we have discussed that. You will understand the parameters that were set by the political working party, that we weren't to put any barriers in place to that. This is my and Ngā Matarai's advice to you, councillors. It is not the advice of the IMSB Secretariat. It is the advice, although they have reviewed this report and had input into it, and we have done our due diligence around talking to people. However, this is our officer advice to you, which is what normally comes to governing body.
So, another part, Rose, can you tell me that discussions in regards to this joint recommendation from the Joint Working Party, can you tell me that the discussions also centred that nothing, if the Minister for Local Government could not get the legislation through, then the Joint Working Group were looking at 2025 elections if if it wouldn't go through Parliament?
Sorry, Councillor, can you please reframe that question? I don't understand.
Well, at the working group, didn't we also discuss and say that that everything depending on the elections in 2022 hinged on the legislative change that the local government minister will be making?
Correct, and she has written to you and said that she will not be putting through anything under urgency and that she does not want to consider a bespoke model for Auckland. We have taken her word on that, Councillor.
No, I understand that, Your Worship. Look, it's just one last part to Rose. Rose, how long, if B goes through, how long would the engagement take for us to do that?
Our current thinking, although I am going to be bringing a timeline back to you, or I'm asking to, is that we would do some quick soundings with mana whenua and Mātāwaka as quick as we can, because there's a lot going on. However, we do want to, if we can, link it up with the future of local government engagement that will be going on. But Denise and O'Shaughnessy and I started looking at that yesterday. I think we need to do some quick soundings, and Ngā Matarai have suggested that we do that. Depending on what comes back from that, then I can put together this timeline for you and understand what the views might be out there, even at an initial stage. And then if there's real unanimity and you all want to change it, then it would still be that the minister had to make legislative change under urgency, which is why I'm recommending to you that that would not be a great process to go out there and talk to people about the ability to change something that the minister has already ruled out, and would be very difficult from a staff resourcing and timing point of view in order to put a representation. She would have to remove that need as well. I just think, Councillor, that I do want to give you our undertaking, to all councillors actually, that we have looked at this really carefully and we are applying considerable resource to it in order to move this along as quickly as we can. I'm not dragging the chain. We are doing our very best to keep faith with the IMSB's recommendations, but it is our advice to you that there is a very slim to none chance of getting this through for 2022 because of what the minister has said to us.
So, Your Worship, I didn't get a timeline. I don't know whether it's going to take 3 months, 2 months with the quick. So, look, I'll save my whakaaro, but I will withdraw me moving this recommendation. Thank you so much.
Okay. Well, look, I'll need somebody else to move the recommendation. Is there? I'm happy to move it. Actually, that might be easiest. Councillor Dalton, are you still happy to second it?
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Warwick, I think you'd indicated you had a comment that you'd like to make on it before I go to the next question.
It might be out of date now, Your Worship, but the issue that Councillor Filipaina raised about engagement, I was just going to draw the meeting's attention to paragraph 4 in the executive summary, where it sets out what was agreed to at the joint meeting. And what was agreed to was a request that we consider 3 things. The first thing was supporting the Royal Commission model of Māori representation, but the second thing was enabling further engagement with mana whenua and Mātāwaka to receive feedback, and the third thing was proposing something to the minister. So that the engagement with mana whenua and Mātāwaka was clearly in that agreement.
Yeah, thanks, Warwick. I think it's quite good to go back to look at what that recommendation did say. I've just look. I understand where Councillor Filipaina is coming from, but the first thing is, if this was about, are we able to do something that would get changed by 2022? I think the answer is that we can't, and the Minister has clearly ruled out a Royal Commission model. But we've also heard at this meeting and back, I think in August when we last met on this, that the timeline doesn't allow it to happen for 2022. Given that we can't do it for 2022, my view is that we should try to be as thorough as possible, because this is not a small issue. This is quite a significant issue, as any issue about representation is. We always have a process of consultation. We'd have to take it to wider public consultation, as well as mana whenua and matawaka, because that's what we always do on representation issues. So we have the time if it's no longer possible to do that in 2022. So it's not a case of holding up something that we might otherwise be able to do, Alf and Pippa, in time for next year. The advice we've got, and the Minister's advice, is that she's ruled out making any change, and that we won't be able to do this in time for 2022. But look, I'll go through further questions, and then obviously, Councillor Filipaina, you've got the chance actually also either to ask further questions or to make comments when we come to that. The next question is in the name of Councillor Shane Henderson.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. And I have a lot of sympathy with Councillor Filipaina's difficulty with B. I'm reading this as kind of the former lawyer that I am, and I'm trying to figure out what this recommendation is actually saying. You know, my particular issue is the first couple of words there: consider its support for a model of Māori representation, comma. Now, it's a long-standing view of this council that we support Māori representation. I think we've always supported it, at the very least in the last few election cycles. So it's, to be honest with you, with respect, it's fairly clumsily drafted. So my question is, and thanks staff for directing the meeting's attention to 4, what the recommendation of the Working Party was, which I was on. Why didn't we just import this recommendation to become B under 13? And I appreciate the point around 2022, and the Minister has clearly ruled that out. We could have deleted that section if it makes everyone more comfortable to go for 2025. That seems to make more sense to me. So why didn't we, I guess my question is, why didn't we import the recommendation under 4 in this report straight over to B?
For you, Mayor Phil. I didn't, Councillor Henderson, because I believe we haven't spoken to mana whenua and matawaka about this. And so, yes, we have always supported Māori representation. What we're being asked to do is look at models of Māori representation. That's what the joint group did. That's what they asked us to do, and we did. We went out and spoke to Dr. Claire Charters and a few other people who had some ideas around these issues, and we considered 5 models. The one that is being advocated for, or that you agreed to consider, is a model of Māori representation, different to the existing model. A model exists. What I don't want to get caught doing when we go out to mana whenua and matawaka, respectfully, is to have had a pre-cooked idea of what that should be. I really don't know what the views out there are. IMSB never purport to talk on behalf of our treaty partners. It's up to us to go out and talk to them individually. That has always been our practice. We take advice from the IMSB of these issues. That's why we're here today. They have advocated for this issue very strongly, and we are here doing justice to that. But we really need to talk to mana whenua and matawaka. I have no idea what their views will be, and I don't want to be seen to be pushing a particular model when I don't know what their views are. That's very simply the best advice from staff who are going to be going out there on your behalf with this kōrero.
Thank you for the advice. I'm not sure if I agree with it necessarily, so I'll just come back to that in comments, Mayor.
Yeah, just to clarify, this is not a question of whether or not we will support direct Māori representation. We already have a policy that we passed by I think the governing body, that said we support the parliamentary model. What this paper is about is, having met with the IMSB, they would like us, through the work done by their working party, which you were a part of, to look at an alternative model. And then we'd have to make a decision as a governing body as to which of those models we think is preferable. But what our staff is saying, they're not challenging Māori representation at all. They're saying we would put ourselves into some considerable jeopardy if we were to make a decision in the absence of having talked to the wider mana whenua and Matawaka groups. And I absolutely agree with that position. We would go into considerable flack if we were to make a decision relating to Māori representation without having talked to them about the two alternative models first. So I think the staff are trying to help overcome a situation where we'd be in some real problems if we didn't do that.
Sorry, Mayor, can I just follow up on that? Thanks
please,
for that.
Councillor.
Yeah, and I agree completely. I think you've made some very good points there, Mayor. My reading of B, though, is that actually it does ask us whether it's supporting Māori representation or not, which is not appropriate. It's just how it's drafted. I don't think that's the intention of the drafter. I think it's just how it's drafted. So my question to staff would be, just in line with that, Mayor, and the previous advice, do they not think under point 4 of this report that recommendation there, enabling further engagement with mana whenua and Matawaka, which was pointed out before, is that not covered in that? And, just to reiterate my previous point of why didn't we just port that over? I think that really addresses the concerns. Does it not? Or
with respect, and through you, Mayor Phil, this was drafted carefully. Appreciate that you might not think it's correct. It was drafted so that we can go out without a pre-cooked, looking like it's pre-cooked, looking like we're saying this is the model we want you to choose. We have an existing position and it is a model. Call it what you want. It's the parliamentary model. That's our position. If we're going to change that model, the Royal Commission is a very valid model. It's the one that has been recommended by the joint group. As staff, it's our staff that are going to be going out there and doing the consultation. I would like to think that we're open to all views that we hear, rather than going out and saying that we all agree that this model is the model and that we want you to essentially rubber stamp it. That is not good practice, and I would feel very uncomfortable doing that.
If just an intervention that might help, if we were to add to our recommendations, note that the current model supported by Auckland Council is for direct Māori representation along the lines of the parliamentary model. Would that, Councillor Henderson, would that overcome your concern?
Yes, it would, Mayor. Thanks. Okay,
so Rose, can I just suggest that you and Sandra just work on, that could be a new B, so it would be, note that the current position of Auckland Council is to support direct Māori representation based on the parliamentary model, and then B becomes C and C becomes D. If you're happy with that, Councillor Henderson, and councillors, I'll just double check. Councillor Dalton, would you be happy with that as the seconder of the recommendations?
Yeah, look, I'm not quite sure. I'm listening to Rose saying that they crafted this very carefully, and they would have done it, I'm assuming, with the Secretariat. It makes sense to me. So if we could get some advice from Rose, perhaps, on that. Yeah,
Rose, would you like to comment on that? Would that
yes,
recommendation?
Yes, so I feel very comfortable with that recommendation. It is stating a fact. It is our current position.
Okay.
Okay, so if you're fine with that, Angela, we'll add in a new B. Hopefully Sandra is working on that, and I'll just go through. Councillor Henderson, any further questions from yourself?
No, that's fine. Thanks, Mayor.
Okay,
Thanks,
Councillor Watson, next question.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. As far as consultation goes with mana whenua and mātāwaka goes, I think the point, it was made quite clearly in the report at point 29 that at the time of the Royal Commission, there wasn't actually unanimity of view amongst mana whenua and mātāwaka, that there were different views on Maori representation. So that clause then essentially is absolutely necessary when you look at it in that historic context where different groups of Maori have different views. So I don't know how you sort that out other than going out to consult with them. Sort of things moving fast here. I mean, I was under the impression, Mr. Mayor, in terms of the recommendations and in particular the use of the word consider, which is pretty clear. That's to think about something. You think carefully about something before making a decision. I was under the impression that this was going to go through the rigour that you suggested, and that there was going to be a comprehensive report coming back with all options. What I'm hearing now with the addition here is that the assumption is that the council view is the parliamentary model is the one that's was the initial decision, and that any other view therefore is that might present a different view then is trumped by this previous decision. So in actual fact, a final decision as such as suggested is going to be a final suggested amongst the choices that we've identified here today. It's not going to be something else.
No, I don't think that's correct, Councillor. As Rose indicated before, my suggested new B simply is a statement of fact. Note that the council's current position is in support of direct Maori representation based on the parliamentary model. What we're doing here, let's come back to why this paper's in front of us. We have undertaken at the IMSB governing body joint meeting to consider in good faith an alternative model that the working party came up with. And I think we should do that. That's what we undertook to do. We should honour our undertaking. But in doing that, given that we're not under a time constraint because no change will happen in 2022, I think it's really important in a representation issue to do it thoroughly and to get it right. Why would we rush through this, and why would we ignore a process of consultation with mana whenua and mātāwaka, because that would only undermine whatever decision that we made if we hadn't been through that process. So it's not predetermining the outcome at all. It's saying this is what our current position is. IMSB has asked us through the working group to consider the alternative model, and that's exactly the process that we're going through. We're honouring our undertaking to look at the alternative model and to do so thoroughly and in consultation, trying to work out what the wider views within Māoridom are about the alternative models.
Okay, and just on that issue, finally on that issue of consultation, your early comments suggest that given that it is to do with representation, then we're obliged to go to the wider public, not just mana whenua and mātāwaka as well. Is that correct?
That's absolutely the case. I might ask Warwick to comment on that. That's part of, or Rose, that's part of our normal process on anything to do with representation, isn't it? That we consult with our people. I think it's important to do that. What I didn't agree with is the idea that you might have to go to have a referendum on it, because that would have predetermined an outcome. But Rose or Warwick, would you like to comment on that? Normal process?
I'll start, and perhaps Warwick can fill in if I leave anything out. We must undertake a representation review before the 2025 elections, where we go out and talk to Aucklanders about how they are going to be represented in Auckland Council. That includes really fundamental questions like, are you going to be elected at large? How many wards, boundaries, etc. There are some really big things that get addressed in a representation review. You must undertake one every 6 years. You've agreed to undertake one. You agreed not to undertake one before the previous election, or for this election. You've agreed to undertake one for 2025. So that is where the general public get to have a say about electoral matters. However, with respect to Māori wards, it is your decision to implement Māori wards or not. It's not a given. You have to make that decision. You've indicated that you will, and you will be able to after this election in November 2022. The minister will have her omnibus bill through, and you will be able to do that. We intend to first of all go out and talk to mana whenua and mātāwaka about this specific issue because it particularly relates to them. Aucklanders will have views, that's for sure, but it is actually your decision, and it will be your direction if you want, when we come back to you with our process next year, to direct us to consult further with Aucklanders more generally before you make a decision again to implement a Māori representation model. But you've already indicated that you would. That's been your previous submission to the minister, that you will implement Māori representation in time for 2025 using the parliamentary model. So if you want us to consult again with Aucklanders more generally, we can. I would suggest to you that's not 100% necessary. But if that's what you want to do, then you can. But we must, I believe, consult with mana whenua on this issue and mātāwaka.
Yeah, and the point, I think, if I'm getting it right, is that we need to have a consultation process in the normal course of events before 2025, which would include any changes we were making. So does that answer your point, Councillor Watson?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, that's good. Now, I don't have any other questions, I think, but I do have some requests for comments, and I'll go first to Councillor Angela Dalton.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Rose and Warwick, for all the work that's gone into this, and Shane and Alf, who were on the group with me, and to the IMSB and the Secretariat. Look, the IMSB would love to have the Royal Commission model in place for 2022, and I think that the minister could continue to say no right up until October, and they would not give up. They won't give up, and that's their right not to give up. But the advice that we've received is that we need to do some more work on this. We must always go back to first principles, which is consulting with mana whenua, and it's the consultation, even if the legislation did go through, to be able to go through the consultation will hold it up anyway, and we would never be able to reach 2022 with the best will in the world. Also accepting that IMSB will never give up, which is their right to want to get this through. So I supported their original recommendations. I don't want to cock things up now, but B just sounds like it's sounding like it's a predetermined outcome. And I just wondered if it could be finessed. I thought perhaps it was going to be incorporated into C. If I can just leave that with Rose to have a think about. But look, I support this. We do need to have more elected Māori representation around our table. And that until we can get enough Māori voting, that's not going to just happen in the course of a general election. So just there's a huge amount of work and a whole lot of conversations that have gone into this, and it's a good thing. It will be a good outcome eventually, but I agree too that we will be looking at 2025. So I'll leave it there, Your Worship. Thank you.
Sorry, Councillor Filipaina, I was on mute. Somebody keeps putting me on mute, Madam Secretary.
Yeah, my apologies for doing that, Your Worship, putting you on mute. Your Worship, look, the issue for me is this. we made a decision at governing body to support the parliamentary model, pending, and the caveat was that there has to be legislative change. We did not go out to mana whenua or mātā waka when we made that decision. With the joint working group, and to let you and everybody know, I have been speaking with the co-chair and the secretariat today, this morning, around this particular issue. When the working group made the recommendation, and that came through to the joint independent Māori statutory board and governing body meeting, it was to put on the table for us to go back to our respective entities, for want of a better term. The independent Māori statutory board, as they said at the joint working group with GB, they are supporting the recommendation from the working group. We then had to discuss it, and that was going to be today. All they needed to know was what was our position going to be. And our position, in my head, as we discussed at the working group, was that we will still support, we will consider the recommendation, but we will still support the parliamentary model with the caveat that is dependent on the legislative change. That is what I was going to push at this particular meeting, so then the independent Māori statutory board would know what our position is, which is currently the parliamentary model and with the legislative change. If the legislative change does not happen, and we've been given the letter, and Angela said it, Councillor Dalton said it correctly. Yes, we did get the letter. Both the co-chairs and the working group got the letter saying, at this stage, no, it's going to go through the timeline and the parliamentary timeline that the minister indicated. So we all knew that if that's the case and it continues right up to October, as Councillor Dalton said, well then it's definitely not going to happen. But she also said something, and this is the reason, Your Worship, why I withdrew my moving of this recommendation. And what Councillor Dalton said is that this consultation will delay any decision. And that is what I am concerned about, is the delay. Even if it went through urgency, as Councillor Dalton said, even if it went through urgency, if the Minister for Local Government had a change of mind and she then pushed it through to her parliamentary colleagues through urgency, we would not be in the position because we will be delaying the process. All independent Māori statutory board wanted in regards to this particular issue was to see whether we would support that recommendation from the joint working group, or we support the parliamentary model and the legislative change, as we have already done. And that's what I was looking forward to with this particular item, is that we as the governing body indicate to the joint working group and independent Māori statutory board is that we have considered your joint recommendation, but we will still go through and support the parliamentary model with the legislative change. Nothing changes then, Your Worship and councillors, and that's why I ended up having a look in the consultation. That was never discussed, even with the Secretariat and the co-chair and at the working group. The consultation, they needed us to make a decision. That decision I was going to support if everybody around this table now wanted to support what we have already indicated and recommended from the governing body, parliamentary with the legislative change. I would be supporting it because that is the way that I know the governing body would support. So, with Your Worship, that's why this consultation, and again, I go back to Councillor Dalton and what she said, consultation will delay the process. Even if it went through urgency, it would still delay the process because we are going out. We're going to maybe take a month or even two And my last point, Your Worship, from my perspective, is that we've already made our decision. We did that at one of the governing body meetings. And for me, I wanted to end up putting this in front of the governing body and for us to make a decision. So, Your Worship, thank you so much. And I'll exercise my vote after this. Kia ora.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Next comment is from Councillor Shane Henderson.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, look, and just acknowledging as well the hard work from the IMSB, particularly those that were on our committee, but also everybody, our councillors that I was really glad to kind of be on the working group with, and also all staff that worked really hard for this. Look, I'm not comfortable voting against this personally, but I would have been tempted to do so, and I'll kind of explain why a little bit. The first principle for me is to support Māori representation, and so I'll be voting consistently with that principle. But as I've said in the questions, I'm not really comfortable with where we've landed in these recommendations. Looking at 4 in this report, and then looking at our representations here, I think this does fundamentally change what our working group actually agreed on. Our view is to support the Royal Commission model, that we're very clear on that. And that's what I was hoping we would vote on in a much clearer way today. I simply don't support contentions around pre-cooking consultations. When all the time we go, for example, we go up to the public and say, look, what do you think about a 3.5 rate increase? We don't say to the public, how much do you want to pay in rates? We go out with substance. We say, look, this is council's position. We've actually changed our position. We support the Royal Commission model, as we always should have done. What do you think about that? Do you maybe like some of these other models that might be in this report as well, either instead? You know, we go with substance. That's something we always do. And I think that today we should have been voting on supporting the Royal Commission model. That's what I thought we should have been doing. Leaving aside the timings around 2022, 2025, because Matua Elf has talked about that extensively. I think ultimately we should have picked up that resolution that we have in 4 in the report and plonked it straight into our recommendations and voted it through. So I'll be voting for this simply because I support the principles of it, but I think we haven't done the right thing. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Councillor Henderson. Next comment, Councillor Newman.
Well, thank you, Your Worship. It's been going on. Look, I don't quite understand where some people are at the moment, because yes, the council's current position is to support direct Māori representation based on a parliamentary model. There are other models potentially to be able to ensure that Māori representation is secured in terms of being able to elect councillors to the governing body, and all options should be considered. And so I don't think that other options should be precluded. That would obviously take time. I think that that's what Rose is referring to. We have the opportunity to take time. I don't think that there is an opportunity in 2022. And so I just want to acknowledge and thank Rose for her considered work on this issue, and to thank Warwick McNaughton and the team. And I would look forward to taking the time necessary to have a frank and candid conversation and to listen to mana whenua and matawaka, because that's one thing that we do have. We have the time to do so. So thank you for the update to the officers. And with respect to the item, noting that we are constrained by the fact that we have to work to the Minister's timetable, which is not conducive to something that we can deliver in accordance with what the IMSB want for 2022. But at least it provides us with an opportunity to assess all of the options, including whether the parliamentary option is still the appropriate option, because frankly, Your Worship, I'm not sure that it is. There may be other ways to do this, but I want to thank Rose, and I do wish her and Warwick every best wish for Merry Christmas to them, and I want to let them know that well, they certainly enjoy my support in terms of the analysis that they do, and I would expect that this will be a confronting conversation when it's had next year, but it will certainly hope to inform decisions. It will certainly help to inform decisions as we move forward to what will be a bespoke model, I'm sure, that we will implement by 2025.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor John Watson.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Mayor. I've been listening carefully to the commentary here, and certainly I support the notion of that consultation taking place with mana whenua and Mātāwaka. I mean, I recall not too long ago, Narimu Blair, for instance, making some pretty telling comments on Maori representation, both as it is and as it might be in the future. And I think, as was alluded to in our report, there is actually quite a history of different views, of divergent views, and I think it's important that they're all captured. What I also think is important to be captured is the wider representation review and the consultation with the public that will go with that as well. I think that's important because there is the wider Auckland community that of course is affected by representation, and although we've seen the undesirable effects of where that representation or that view in terms of referendums can be used as something of a trump card, I certainly don't go along with the notion that somehow then should automatically translate into people more generally not having a view on matters where they are represented. And let's face it, in a body as a council, there's votes taken by all the people that are present that affect them, that affect their communities, and that's, I guess, one of the fundamental principles of democracy, that people have a say in the people that represent them and in the decisions they make, albeit this is slightly outside of that realm, but the same principle applies. Certainly, I guess, my view is from the start is that I support elected Maori representation. I think that's probably in keeping with what I've just said, and I suspect a lot of people would feel the same. In terms of the particular model, what I find a little amusing in some respects is the position of the IMSB in itself. So we're talking about parliamentary models or other models. I'm not aware of any model in New Zealand that exists currently or is being proposed where you have a body such as the IMSB that was appointed largely as the means of coping ineffectively as it is turned out, I think, in terms of Maori demands himself of Maori representation, where you have 9 people unelected sitting on all council committees, except the governing body, and now conceivably 3 or 2 people that are elected across Auckland as a whole. That, to me, doesn't seem to emerge sufficiently clearly from this, what actually is being proposed if we take the wider context, and I think that needs to certainly be socialised, certainly with the public in the first place, that they understand exactly what is being proposed here in the long term in terms of overall representation. And I take representation to be where people have the ability to vote and affect decisions and affect budgets. So I look forward to that representation. I look forward to what comes back from mana whenua and Mātāwaka, and I look forward to a considered decision down the line where all the realities of what's being proposed are put on the table, and people then vote accordingly on that, as opposed to perhaps separating specific proposals off and giving the impression that that's all that's being put up, where in actual fact there already is a form of representation in existence at the moment. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Deputy Mayor Bill Cashmore.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for the comments for fellow councillors and for the work that the Joint Working Party has done, and particularly also to Rose for the work that her and her team has done in Warwick about this proposal. I'm going to be supporting his recommendation simply because the Minister's told us very clearly that any decision by 22 is not going to happen. So we're looking at 25. Let's go out and talk to our mana whenua and mata waka, get their views and what they would like and desire, and let's get that decision made before the 25 election, and so it can help inform the legislation that the Minister is proposing to put forward to the House at that time, to be enabled at that time. I think what's here gives us a more comprehensive opportunity to get a better understanding of what Aucklanders want, and particularly what our mana whenua and mata waka want. So I'll be supporting Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. And I next have Councillor Tracy Mulholland.
Thanks, Your Worship. The Deputy Mayor just stole all my words. So I won't repeat it because that is exactly, what I was thinking. But I am one who strongly believes in democracy, and I think we do need to hear back from community, and I do believe that we need to hear back from mata waka, mana whenua, and any people who would like to contribute to the conversation. I understand absolutely, and probably with a lot more clarity now. So I want to thank councillors for debate and information sharing, and I want to really acknowledge the staff from my perspective who have worked on this, so it makes it easier for me as a decision maker to move forward. I will be supporting the recommendations, and Your Worship, I'd like to acknowledge the Working Party on this because it is extra time. It is a very, very critical and important issue to our community. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Councillor Hills, I'm not quite sure, are you seeking a comment or not?
No,
Okay.
My comment was largely I'm confused at what happened
in
the last half an hour. So but that's not a speaking turn, so thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Grigg-Sayers, last comment then, and I'll wind up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll probably feel a little bit similar to you, Councillor Hills, over the last half hour. But look, I just want to congratulate Rose and Warren also for the presentation of the paper today. I have found their presentation and comments very helpful. And yes, look, we do need to go out and get the views of the other parties as suggested in the recommendation. I certainly support the idea of elected Māori representation, very much so. But I would find it hard to support, I wouldn't support the continuation of the ISMB and its unelected membership plus seats for elected Māori representation, especially when anyone, including those who identify as Māori, could run for any of the existing ward seats as well. So on that note, I will be supporting the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Look, if I can just wind up, excuse me, if I can still speak. Actually, I'm just going to get a glass of water if you can give me 1 minute.
5-minute break?
I think calling for a glass of water may fix my throat. Look, just 5 months ago, we met as a governing body, and we had a very full discussion, and we listened to the report of our professional advisors. And as a result of that discussion, we voted very clearly to adopt a parliamentary model for Māori representation. I support direct Māori representation. I think that the government of the day made a mistake in not allowing for it, along the lines that we have for well over a century allowed for it in Parliament. That is our position until we change it. What happened 2 weeks ago was that when we met with the Independent Māori Statutory Board and then heard the response from the Joint Working Party, they asked us to look at an alternative model, which is the Royal Commission model. It's a quite different model. And while I appreciate that some councillors might have wanted to have adopted that model there and then, it's not wise when it comes to a representation question, in my mind, to change a considered position with a new position without thoroughly examining the pros and cons of which of the alternative models are to be preferred. And if you are to do that, then it makes sense to me that you listen to what the voices in the community are telling us, first of all in the Māori community. And there isn't one voice in the Māori community on this issue, just as there isn't one voice in the Pākehā community on the issue. But if we were to consider making a significant change, then we are obliged to listen to Māoridom, mana whenua and mata waka. And in any change in representation, we are, in my view, obliged to consider that for consultation with our community. In the end, the decision is ours as the governing body. We will listen to differing views, and my guess is that they will not be unanimous, either in Māoridom or in the wider community, but we will listen to those views, and on the basis of hearing from those views and hearing the professional advice that we've received, we will make a decision. Is there a need to act urgently on this matter? And I think the answer to that is no, because there is no way that we will actually change the representation system to any alternative model for 2022. And there's no way at the moment, unless the Minister decides to change the government's position, that we would be able to adopt the Royal Commission model as a bespoke model. So I think we take the time that we need to over that to get the decision right. And because it is about representation in a democracy, it's absolutely fundamental. Fundamental to democracy, that when you make decisions about who is represented as elected representatives, that we do it thoroughly and that we consult on it. And that's why I support the recommendations that we have got here. We may decide to change the model or to advocate to the government to change the model. That's on the table. That would not be my preference at this point, but it is an option that is open to us as a governing body. But before we do that, we would need to consider all of the implications, the costs, the benefits of the alternative models thoroughly, and to listen to what the community and the Māori community are telling us so that we get this decision right. So I'm not particularly confused about it. We have a position. We have advocacy for adopting a different position. And in order to consider those alternative models, we will talk to the community about it before reaching our decision. And we'll do it within a time frame that will allow us to implement a change in time for 2025. So on that basis, I would commend to you the recommendations that you have before you. So I'll now put that to a vote. I'll do it on the voices unless there's a call for a division. If people are against it, you can, of course, record your opposition to the recommendations, should you wish. So not having heard a call for a division, I'll put it on the voices. All those in favour, please say aye.
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 To the contrary, no.
No. No. And can I'm not supporting A, C, D. I will only support B. Thank you.
Okay, so Councillor Filipina recording his opposition to A, C, D. Is there anybody else that wants their opposition recorded?
Yep, Kathy.
And to which clauses, Councillor?
Same.
Okay. Any further opposition or desire to have your voice recorded against?
Mayor, I'd like to abstain on A, C and D because that's not what the working group that I was on actually voted through.
Okay, we have two votes against, recorded against, one abstention. Then I will declare the vote carried.
Sorry, I'll be voting similarly with Councillor Filipina.
Okay, so
Me too.
Councillor
Sorry.
Bartley.
Councillor Bartley. Okay. So with those votes record, that's 4 votes. If I've got it right, Sandra, recorded against, 1 abstention, but carried by a majority. I declare the vote carried. And councillors, it's just after 12:30. I suggest we take a break for lunch and we resume at 1 o'clock. Okay, thank you very much.